Good afternoon, and welcome to yet another extremely topical and extremely timely AMET webinar. On December 8th, we all watched with astonishment as the rebel forces led by Mohammad al-Jolani, who renamed himself Ahmad al-Shara, rapidly took over much of Syria. Some of us were relieved that the Shiite crescent that ran from Tehran and through Baghdad, Damascus, and Beirut now has a gaping hole in the middle of it in Syria, and that the brutal grip of Bashar al-Assad, tied to Iran and Russia, was finally gone. Yet, Mohammad al-Jolani of Hayat Tahrir al Sham has proven not to be a Jeffersonian Democrat. His roots are in Jabhat al-Nusra, and that is an Al-Qaeda affiliate, also tied to ISIS. Al-Jolani has powerful ties to Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who'd like to resurrect the Ottoman Empire, which was at its peak during the 15th and the 16th centuries. Erdogan, who has called Israel, quote, a terror state committing genocide, and has backed Hamas, but his particular antipathy and that of Mohammad al-Jolani or Ahmad al-Shar is directed against the Kurds, who have fought valiantly with the United States against ISIS. Erdogan plans to, quote, transform Syria into a Sunni Islamist stronghold, unquote. The HTS, or Hayat Tahrir al Sham rebels, according to Turkish sources, were, quote, trained and armed for over a decade in Turkey. Here to discuss this is Diliman Abdulkader. Diliman is a great friend who once worked for AMET as our director of our Kurdish project. He is now the founder of American Friends of Kurdistan, AFK, which is an advocacy and educational organization established to strengthen, protect, and promote U.S. Kurdish ties. AFK supports policies that advance the national security interest of Americans, Kurds, and our other allies. Diliman comes from a wonderful foreign policy and national security background where he invests his time on Capitol Hill, educating lawmakers and staffers on the plight of the Kurds. Diliman received his master's at the American University in Washington, D.C. in international peace and conflict resolution. Diliman, first of all, please tell us exactly how threatened the Kurds are by Hayat Tahrir al Sham.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. And I want to thank your team as well for setting this timely webinar up. AMET has done some great work in DC and even specifically on the Kurdish issue as well for a very long time. And I used to be an AMET colleague as well, and we did some excellent stuff there. Absolutely. So the situation in northeast Syria and specifically on the Kurds continues to be dire. It's with the Kurds are constantly a threat, not just from Turkey, but also now we have supposedly a new government in Damascus, led by HTS, which is Al-Qaeda, essentially, and backed by Turkey. So just to put it into perspective, you have Turkish-backed rebels and terrorist organizations and Islamists attacking the Kurds in the northeast as we speak. You have Turkey attacking the Kurds alone from the northeast as we speak. And now you have a Damascus government that is backed by Turkey, led by Jolani, that is saying, everyone must put their arms down, and the state has the only right to have their weapons, and that includes the Kurds, and therefore they must put their arms down and submit to Damascus. So the Kurds have been cornered, if you will, but the Kurds have to also realize that they have leverage as well. They have a lot of things going for them that they can use with negotiations in Damascus when that time comes. And also, it's also in Turkey's interest to keep the northeast region stable and not cause another invasion. As far as how they're being treated by HTS, we can only go by the Jolani's latest interviews with, BBC and CNN and the Saudi Arabian outlets that he's been given. Of course, the talking points are well structured. They are for Western consumption. We have to keep that in mind. It's for folks here in the West, for you and me. He's not trying to please the Middle East. He's trying to please, officials in Israel. That's number one, of course, and also in Washington. And largely to keep the threat level for himself down, to take him off the terror list. He already had the bounty removed from the State Department. So this whole attempt at normalizing HTS being the new face of Damascus is way too early. The rush is there, and this is largely led by Turkey to basically, rush to remove from the terror list, rush to start diplomatic relations with Damascus, and this is all going to be it's at the end of the day, when the dust is settled, it'll be turned towards the Kurds in northeast Syria.
How much land does Turkey control in northern Syria?
Yeah, so Turkey controls the portions, Afrin is number one. They occupied, and we worked on this previously, if you recall, in 2018. They invaded northeast Syria. That's a whole portion, and that's predominantly and historically Kurdish dominated and populated area. But now it's Arabized, it's Turkified. You have Turkish flags flying there, occupied by Turkey. And then you have northeast Syria in 2019. So 2018, Afrin invasion, you have 2019, where the so-called 30-kilometer safe zone. And this is the same context that they're using to basically start another invasion, continuing that safe zone. What Turkey wants is a large swath of the Syrian border along Turkey's border under their control, only to basically dismantle what the Kurds have established. And it's either that or the Kurds put down their weapons, and Turkey wants to quickly recognize the Damascus government, which they're on their way doing. So I think this is all aimed at the Kurds. And then you have pockets of Idlib province where there are Turkish presence and where HTS stemmed from. Remember, we used to say that the largest al-Qaeda hub in the world is in Syria. It's in Idlib province. That's HTS. That's the guys that came down to Damascus. That was basically controlled for decades, for over a decade under the Turkish government, with outposts surrounding Idlib province. It's the same guys. So not much has changed. And also, we don't know what is the makeup of HTS today. We don't know. It's foreign fighters. They're not all Syrian. And we don't know their human rights record as well. So Turkey is well invested into Syria, ensuring that the Kurds are dismantled and there's no autonomy.
What's the nature of the relationship between Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Mohammad al-Jolani?
Yeah, so I think there's a historical, when I say historical, there's a decades-long relationship between HTS and Idlib province and Turkey. Turkey has always, kind of protected the Islamist group, largely because, Turkey would rather use these Islamist fighters, these terrorists on the ground, rather than its own Turkish forces to basically gain territory inside Syria. That's that's what they've done. They don't use their own territory. They come in from the air, but they don't use their own military on the ground unless it's against the Kurds. And they've done both. So they've done, they've used the Islamists, whether it's HTS, whether it's these groups of radicals in northeast Syria and in the provinces they control, and their own forces against the Kurds. But there's a relationship between HTS as a whole and Jolani as a whole and Ankara. And Turkey was the first government to visit Damascus as soon as Bashar al-Assad fell. So they, in fact, rushed to be the first. to recognize, and they quickly are pushing everyone else around them to quickly recognize Damascus.
Speaking of Kurdish leverage, there are a great deal of oil deposits right underneath Kurdish soil. How likely is it that Mohammad al-Jolani or Recep Tayyip Erdogan have their sights on this oil, and how can the Kurds leverage their own territory to make sure that they benefit from this?
That's an excellent question. So to understand this, the resources conversation in Syria, we have to, Turkey doesn't have resources. They don't have natural resources, oil, gas. So Turkey requires this from its neighbors, whether it's from Iraq, whether it's from Syria. And they haven't been able to benefit off the resources in Syria because the Kurds are there. The Kurds control nearly 40% of Syrian territory in northeast Syria. The Kurds control access to the Euphrates River and the Euphrates Valley. And the Kurds also control nearly 100% of the oil and a large portion of the gas reserves in Syria. And that's not, and also, the wheat production and the other natural resources in the country. So the Kurds have a lot of leverage. This is important. So this is going to be all used in negotiations with Damascus soon. And also Damascus is, right, it's they don't have an existing economy. I mean, the economy was already failing under Assad. But as of now, there's no infrastructure in the country. There's no economic ties with any other country. So they need the Kurds. It's actually the other way around. The Damascus needs the Kurds rather than the Kurds needing Damascus. And same for Turkey. Turkey needs the oil and the resources inside northeast Syria. And this is all part of when we say neo-Ottoman is an expansion agenda from Ankara, this is it. They want the resources, and they want to quickly dismantle the government and the autonomous northeast Syria to basically rush for economic ties between Damascus and Ankara. This is all, and this comes down again, it comes down to the Kurds. Turkey's goal is always to ensure that there's not a repeat of what the Iraqi Kurds have in Kurdistan region of an autonomous region.
So right now we have approximately 2,000 troops around the Kurdish bases. In about 18 days, President-elect Donald Trump will assume office. How likely will it be that after he's inaugurated, they'll remain there?
That's that's $1 million question. So previously we had 2,000 forces. I believe we had 2,500 forces in Syria when President Trump took office in 2016. He then withdrew some of those forces. It came down to 900. But recently, the Pentagon announced after, or even a few weeks before Assad's fall, that the numbers have actually increased to 2,000, as you mentioned. Again, the same arguments hold. Our presence in Syria is not an endless war argument. Our presence in Syria is not for more boots on the ground. We know Americans don't have an appetite to be involved in another war. But our presence in Syria, United States is a military power. It's a global superpower, and we have allies around the world. If we're not there, somebody else will fill in that vacuum. United States, it has invested 900 and now 200 and now 2,000 U.S. boots on the ground. And that's largely to train, equip, and advise. That mission hasn't changed, and also to fight against ISIS. This is critical. ISIS, the caliphate, may have gone, but the ideology still exists. They're terrorists that they're on the ground in Syria and in Iraq. So that fight is ongoing. And we saw the ideology with what happened here in the United States over the past few days in New Orleans, where 10 innocent Americans lost their lives and over 30 have been injured. So the threat is still there. ISIS is still there. That's why it's important to remain in Syria, alongside the Kurds who are fighting this radical group. And and also there's 10,000 ISIS fighters in northeast Syria in prison under the control of the Kurds. there's also over 50,000 of their family members, the ISIS wives and children, in camps. This can all go go south very quickly if Turkey continues the military invasions against the Kurds, because they're forced to suspend their talks. They're forced to suspend the fight against ISIS, and they have to focus on defending themselves against Turkey. So the threat is still there. The United States is present. It's very important, and I hope President Trump sees this as far as not removing troops from Syria. We don't want to repeat and backlash of what we saw back in 2019 when he did remove over half of the troops.
So how likely is it for Hayat Tahrir al Sham to open up the prisons and release the ISIS fighters?
So that's unlikely. But that's unlikely. So what they wanted, and that's another leverage point, aside from the resources that we were talking about, is that the Kurds are actually keeping Syria safe. They're keeping, a potential opposition to HTS in prison. So, you have ISIS, you have different radical groups, you have different Islamists, different variations in Syria components, and ISIS, and is one of them that HTS would rather see in prison because why? It benefits Damascus, and Damascus can continue leading and try to build the country and whatnot as far as HTS goes. But ISIS, and it's also a benefit for Turkey as well, right? Turkey has to see this. Turkey has in the past has threatened the Kurds, but has not threatened ISIS. Turkey has aided ISIS, but has squashed the Kurds and invaded and slaughtered the Kurds. So the hypocrisy coming from Ankara is ridiculous. So I think it's time for both Damascus and Ankara to see that the Kurds are actually our friends. They're not a threat, and we should grant them what they fought for, this autonomy.
So Syria is made up of many, many different ethnic enclaves. How likely is it that Syria will remain intact and that it will not just split up into various ethnic enclaves?
That depends on how this this new government is formed, and where they take this. So far, what we know is that HTS wants Sharia law across the country, but there's a problem with that. You have Alawites, which are Shia. Former, Assad was Alawite, but he's a minority leading a Sunni Muslim majority country. You have the Jews in the south of the country, and you have the Christians who are across the country, and then you have the Kurds who are primarily in northeast Syria. So all these minorities don't want Sharia as the law. So now that there's a conflict. So the HTS and Jolani said the next elections will be in 4 years. That's another problem. So you have 4 years. Nobody elected you. There's no free and fair elections. But somehow you're already implementing laws and institutions and the infrastructure of the education system, the curriculum of the children, the so-called the constitution of the country through the lens of Sharia law. So there's a problem with that. And he's called for minorities and just everyone across the country to lay down their arms, and that the only folks that should have arms are, is the military and the state in Damascus. This is the central government. There's another problem. Minority rights are not guaranteed. Who says that, okay, if the Christians lay down their arms, that their rights will be weak? This is the Middle East. We've seen what happens to Christians in the Middle East. Their numbers have gone down dramatically in the millions across the Middle East, not just in Syria. And the Alawites will be targeted, of course, especially because they were part of the Assad. Assad was Alawite, and the Jews in the south. That's why there's Israel's involvement in the south there as well, and of course the Christians and the Kurds. So I think there are, human rights is a huge, plays a central role in this. Jolani hasn't proven anything yet. That's why we shouldn't rush to any, normalization with Damascus. And that goes for the Kurds too. there should be no rush, and the disarming of minorities should not be part of the conversation yet, because we don't know who the new military is, for example, right? These guys are, we have, there's countless videos across social media where in Syria, where they are folks from Central Asia and East Asia. They're not Syrian. What are they doing in Syria? And there's folks from around the world who are not Syrian. What are they doing in Syria? They're part of the new Syrian military. We don't know what the human rights records are of these individuals. How do they feel about Christians? How do they feel about Jews? How do they feel about Kurds? So this is all part of the building of Syria, that you cannot demand the disarming of minorities first and then build Syria. You have to build the military first. You have to vet the military first to ensure that the minorities feel confident and comfortable in the country.
Right. So, assuming that Erdogan or Mohammad al-Jolani want to create a Sunni caliphate, do you think some of the other Sunni nations, such as Saudi Arabia, might want a piece of Syria?
Well, I think what Jolani has done is try to appease to the Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia. He's taken a stance where he's kind of holding Iran accountable, which part of your introduction was that we were relieved that the Iran had lost influence in the country. Of course, that's good for Israel. That's good for the Kurds. That's good for their whole campaign across the region in the Shia crescent, if you will. But there's another side to that. Now, okay, Iran is eliminated, but now they're trying to, say all the nice things you want to say that Saudi Arabia wants to hear, that UAE wants to hear, the Gulf states want to hear. So there's this whole, there's this whole selling of talking points to not only the West, but also the Gulf, and kind of also ignoring Israel, not bringing Israel into the conversation, as to say to Israel, we're not talking about you, we're not a threat to you, and not discussing the Palestinian issue either, if you see his interviews, because he knows what that indirectly means. So we just have to be careful in taking, taking for everything that he says as real. We have to let this play out. It's still very early. And as far as we know what he wants to create, Sunni dominated, Syria is a Sunni majority country, but that doesn't mean it has to be led by Sharia law. That Sunni Muslim does not equal Sharia law. That doesn't make sense. I think it should be free and fair elections. It should be a democratic state, where a decentralized state, especially where minorities have full and guaranteed rights, including the Christians, the Kurds, and the Alawites, and the Jews, of course. So I think this whole thinking of we are Sunni majority, therefore we have to establish a caliphate under a Sharia law is not the notion. If he goes down this route, if there is elections in 4 years, I'm not very confident of that. But there's elections in 4 years, which is very far out. It should be within 3 months, as he promised earlier. That this is not going to go down well, and Syria is going to continue to stay in this civil war phase.
So Joshua Landis, who's a Middle East expert at Oklahoma University, just published that the textbooks have begun to be Islamified. Have you noticed that? And is that an indicator of things to come? Dylan?
Absolutely. That tells you that the textbooks, this is supposed to be a caretaker or transitional government. The official government of the new Syria should handle textbooks, should handle the curriculum of the schools. Removing Assad, which is fine, that's normal. Obviously, that's not controversial. Okay, for his portraits and the praising of Assad in the school curriculum. But removing, for example, context that state, we're here to defend the nation, Syria, and replacing it where with words like God, or it's leading towards, everything indicates that it's Sharia. Even the head of women's affairs has said that women should have certain rights and women should have, should not have certain rights. They should stay in the household, take care of their husbands, their families. And I will disagree and I will not accept anybody who opposes what I'm saying. That just tells you they put the exact person that they want, how, they're literally telling us how they see the future of Syria. And that is under Sharia law. They're not hiding this. It would be our naivety to accept this and to realize that it's something else. That this new Syria will, okay, Assad is gone. We're going to have a free and fair democratic elections, great relationship with Israel, and the Kurds are accepted, and just normalizing of relationships. But it's not that, unfortunately. And that is for the Syrian people to decide, by the way. I want to make sure, I make that clear. Let them have elections. Let them have a referendum if they want a Sharia law. But you cannot just roll into Damascus and say Sharia law is the new, law of the land. I think that's just a repeat of Assad. It was what Assad said at the end of the day, that was the law of the land. And I think this shouldn't be a repeat.
Right. So on Monday, Mohammad al-Jolani met with Kurdish and Christian groups, trying to, quote unquote, open up diplomatic ties. Do you think it is just another example of taqiyya and trying to fool the world? Or do you think there might be some chance of diplomacy with Kurdish and Christian?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's in the interest, especially for Christians, it's in the interest to engage with Damascus because their lives depend on it. They're not a large, they're a minority, but they're not armed for most part of it, and they're also, they've been a group that's been targeted across the Middle East. So engaging with Damascus, unfortunately, it's HTS, but engaging with Damascus allows for conversations to secure their rights, which is 100% fine. As far as the Kurds go, they've always been, saying that they want to, engage with Syria. They're not separatists. This goes against the talking points that Ankara has been making, which kind of contradicts what they're doing. So I think what the Kurds are doing, engaging in Damascus, is actually smart, proving that, hey, we're legitimate. Turkey doesn't see them as legitimate. We're engaging in talks. We have 100,000 plus U.S. trained and armed force, and we're going to be part of the conversation. What Turkey is going to demand is that they're not part of the conversation. They did this with the talks with Russia and Iran previously in Astana, if you recall, where they kept the Kurds off, the negotiating tables. And I think that's what their intention is now. But Jolani is wise, continue the conversations. Conversations are always good to have than war, of course. But the Kurds also have to not rush into engagement with Damascus. The Kurds have to keep in mind that Damascus needs you more than you need Damascus. You already have the infrastructure. You have of a state more than Damascus does. And when I say Damascus, I mean HTS. You already have a military that the Damascus doesn't. So I think you have the leverage that Damascus wants and needs, and of course the resources. The conversation is in the Kurdish interest largely because, okay, we have to keep Turkey off our backs. And to do this, you have to engage in Damascus. And I'm sure there's pressure from the United States and the State Department to have the Kurds engage in Damascus long-term wise in preparation for a potential withdrawal under the Trump administration as well.
So speaking of the State Department, as you know, they maintain a rewards for justice program, and Mohammad al-Jolani's name had prominently appeared on it until he took over Damascus. And there was a $10 million bounty on his head, which they now withdrew. What are your feelings about that?
I think it was way too rushed to remove that. There was no proof and indication that he should be removed. We have to keep in mind that Jolani was put on that list. There was a bounty for Jolani for a reason. He's part of al-Qaeda. He was part of the early on ISIS. He was inspired by the 9/11 attacks and the Palestinian Second Intifada. And when he went into Iraq, the United States forces put him in prison for I think 5 years in Iraq. And then once he was released, he went into Syria. The timing worked so well in 2011 with al-Qaeda HTS and later founded HTS. So I think this was premature on the United States with the State Department's move. There was absolutely no rush to do this. I'm not sure why they felt they had to do this. You should have left it to the next administration. The Biden administration should have not touched this issue. And Jolani took advantage of the transitional period that we're in right now between governments. Transitioning from the Biden administration to the Trump administration. I think they felt that, I think part of the conversation when the State Department folks visited Damascus was that we might not be removed under the $10 million bounty, might not be removed under the Trump administration. Therefore, we need you to do it now for us to do A, B, and C for you, whatever A, B, and C is from the State Department. So I think that was, in my personal opinion, that wasn't their call to make. Should have left it to the next administration, and HTS should not be delisted from the terror list as well. I know there's conversation on that right now, even not just the United States, with the UK and the EU as well. This is very premature. Let them prove themselves. My question, in follow-up to that is, what's the rush? This may take years for HTS to prove that they are for minorities, they protect the rights of women and children, that this will not be Afghanistan 2.0. Let them prove themselves. We're not saying don't remove them. We're saying let them prove themselves, and they may not prove themselves. It may be a different picture in 4 years if there are elections, and if Jolani is so confident that he is no longer part of this whole terrorist organization, and he's not a jihadist, hold elections immediately. You're popular. You're at your highest popular. You would win, right? If you're so popular, right? This is the time when you're popular. You just rolled into Damascus. Assad is gone. The Syrian people are excited. They want change. They'll vote for you if you are, this whole free and fair elections, if you're right. But in 4 years, if you haven't proven A, B, and C, you'll lose. Then what? Now the Syrian people are stuck with you, and you might not want to leave power. Ankara will continue to back you. So it creates a whole repeat of 2011 with Bashar Assad, a whole idea of dictatorship. But this time you have an Islamist authority in Damascus.
Right. So how likely is it that either Recep Tayyip Erdogan or Mohammad al-Jolani will set up military bases throughout Syria that might threaten not only the Kurds, but also the state of Israel?
Oh, very likely. Once Syria right now is building its infrastructure, it's building its economy, it's receiving aid from Gulf countries. Saudi Arabia just sent some aid. It's demanding aid from the United States and EU, but it's also building its military. It's it's building its military infrastructure. It's rebuilding the highways, and all the Kurds control large swaths of Syria. 40% of Syria's territory is under the Kurds.
Didn't understand that.
I'm so sorry. I don't know why my cell phone did.
I didn't.
Okay.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, so and they have access to the Euphrates River, as I mentioned. They control that, and they control the resources. So I think the next maneuver for Damascus is northeast Syria. That's their obstacle and last battle to controlling the entire Syria. Turkey is 100% all in, and they're already saying actually Turkey has made arguments that the Kurds have been making for years, as far as the ISIS prisoners, that countries should take back their citizens who happen to be ISIS terrorists. They should be held in the courts of their home countries. Now Turkey's making that argument. Why? Because the intention is not genuine. The intention is to dismantle the autonomous government in northeast Syria. So they have a different intention, where the Kurds' intention was, hey, we don't have the resources. We're fighting Turkey. We're fighting Turkish-backed jihadist groups, and we're stuck also with these terrorists, ISIS terrorists. Everybody needs to take back their terrorists and hold them accountable in their home courts. So there's a very different take on this, but Turkey's intention is not genuine, is to dismantle northeast Syria. But I think once the dust settles, once the military is up and running in Damascus, I think the focus will be northeast Syria. That's the next, hopefully it's not a battle. That's why negotiations are critical. And that's why the Kurds see negotiations with Damascus as, okay, no problem. It doesn't mean the recognition of Damascus. It doesn't mean the recognition of Jolani. It just means let's talk. We'll see where it takes us. And if that's an interest for the Kurds, it'll lead that way.
So can you describe, Diliman, the nature of the relationship between the state of Israel and the Kurds?
It's very historical. It's deep, but it's, in modern times, it can be a double-edged sword, largely because the Kurds are stateless, and it's also, some at times secretive, just because simply it's not in the interest of either Israel or the Kurdish nation to have it public because of the surrounding of where Kurdistan is. Going back to Salahuddin Ayyubi, Saladin, his doctor was Jewish. And then you can fast forward to Iraq in the 50s and the 60s, where the Kurds held after the establishment of the state of Israel in 1948, the Kurds helped many of the Jews escape and flee Iraq when they were being persecuted. Right now there's talks, fast tracking to today, there's talks of conversations happening between the Kurds in northeast Syria and Jerusalem. So I think there's a huge historical ties. There's shared interests between the two nations, between the two peoples. Right, because the Kurds are fighting terrorism, Israel's fighting terrorism. Israel's fighting, Hezbollah, Hamas, all the bad guys, Iran. These are the same adversaries that the Kurds have. And all these adversaries that Israel is fighting and have taken down their leadership have all spoken out against the Kurds, Kurdish independence. And Israel was the first country and only country in the world when the Kurds held an independent referendum in 2017 that they recognized the results. So that just tells you. And then we have the foreign minister of Israel today, Gideon Saar, who has been very vocal in supporting the Kurds and being an advocate for the Kurds when he's having conversations with world leaders around the world. So I think he's filling in that gap where the Kurds aren't able to themselves, where they don't have access to the international community. Israel's playing that role, and I think Israel can take this relationship further by utilizing its leverage, by also standing alongside the United States, by being vocal in President Trump's ears and the next administration, and saying that it's critical that we stay with the Kurds in northeast Syria, that we keep a presence. That's huge. That might change the mind of the next administration if they're thinking about withdrawing. So I think there's a lot of leverage that Israel can do more as far as the protection of the Kurds, because at the end of the day, they are a state. The Kurds are not. The Kurds recognize that they're going through their own the issues that the terrorism that they're surrounded with, but at the end of the day, they do have more leverage than the Kurds, and I think one of those leverages, and I think it's critical for Israel to do, is outside of being vocal and speaking up on behalf of the Kurds in their conversations with world leaders and social media and the media, is provide air support for northeast Syria. I think that's critical alongside the United States. They don't have to do this alone. And that basically pushes back Turkey and tells Turkey that the Kurds are untouchable. You cannot continue to target them. They are the ones fighting ISIS. They are the ones fighting Islamists. We have a shared interest in taking down jihadism in the Middle East, and they are the one protecting minorities, and the Kurds are leading this fight, just like Israel is against Hamas and Hezbollah and all the other terrorist organizations.
Okay, so our dear friend Dr. Harold wrote in, and I apologize, Harold. I don't speak Turkish. I have been pronouncing Erdogan's first name wrong. It's Recep, not Recep,
Re-
Erdogan, sorry. And he also wrote that we heard the Erdogan regime has asked Jolani to send HTS troops to northeastern eastern Syria to control the Syrian Kurds. But it seems that Jolani says that his forces are tired and already spread too thin. Is there a fissure here that we in the West might be able to take advantage of?
Well, Jolani has a decision to make, right? He's very close with Erdogan in the Turkish government, and they were the first to recognize Jolani. They're fully backing this government, which is great for Jolani. He can't lose that acceptance from Ankara, because Ankara does the bidding for HTS and Jolani around the world, and removing him from the terror list, and normalizing ties, and establishing diplomatic relations. So they're Turkey is lobbying on behalf of HTS where HTS can't. So, but they also have to make a decision is, okay, Turkey is great for us, but if we're really trying to convince the Syrian people that we're for Syrians, not for Turkey's ambitions, should we continue to engage with the Kurds in northeast Syria, try to normalize ties, and not take the bait that Turkey is trying to push us into, which is start another conflict. Putting forces in northeast Syria means war. That's how the Kurds will take it. So I think that's what Turkey is pushing towards. So I think Jolani has a decision to make there between Damascus and the Kurds. The right move would be to engage the Kurds peacefully in continuing negotiations and not letting Turkish talking points lead your conversations. But as far as taking advantage, as far as say the United States also has leverage. We have to realize that as part of removing HTS from the terror list should be, and I think this should have been part of the conversation of removing the bounty, the $10 million bounty, which we did not really demand anything except, okay, respect minorities, but those were all just words, not guarantees. Should be that you should not, start another conflict with the Kurds. The Kurds are not stateless peoples as they were under Assad regime, and the minorities should be given guaranteed rights. So these are all leverage points and guaranteed demands that we can make rather than simply just removing them from the terror list and, for example, not invading and listening to Turkey and putting troops in northeast Syria without the acceptance and the full awareness and agreement with the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, who are our allies with the Americans.
So Harold also writes that among Jolani's people, there's talk of establishing, as I had opened up with, a caliphate or reemerging Sunni Islamic dynasty. And he wants to reestablish the Ottoman Empire based on the capital in Istanbul. He says there, or Ankara. This is serious. Can we somehow use this towards our advantage?
Yeah, I think, listen, a lot of this, what's going on in Syria, is to our advantage. We just have to not be naive, and what they're saying, and as I said before, is there's everything they're saying and parroting is for Western consumption. They're saying everything we want to hear. This is great, of course, but they're saying everything we want to hear. But at the end of the day, the reality will hit. These are Islamists. Sharia law will be the law of the land, and the Kurds will not accept that. Christians will not accept that. The Jews will not accept that. So I think that's a reality. And what's the other alternative is that their rights have to be guaranteed. Sharia doesn't apply to them, and that Sharia is not the law of the land. I think that's just the reality we have to accept, and that's the talking points that we should be making, is that they're trying to push Sharia. Sharia is, at the end of the day, is going to be the winner here, whether we like it or not. And that's why we should not delist them. That's why we should not disarm the Kurds, and that's why we should not withdraw troops. That's important. Withdrawing troops, American troops from northeast Syria will allow HTS and Turkey to move in forces into northeast Syria. Disarming the minorities will allow HTS from gaining more territory and Turkey from gaining more territory. So we actually have the leverage, but unfortunately, with the mainstream media and, they're just taking in this whole, the groomed Jolani. And I think we should just fight the talking points that's not the reality. That's not what's going on the ground.
Exactly. So, Diliman, what's your view of Israel taking over Bashar al-Assad's old military bases and the Syrian side of Mount Hermon?
I think Israel is looking out for its national security interest. Israel is basing its military moves based on historical context, right? HTS has a track record, a human rights violations, a huge long track record that they've targeted as civilians. That's number one. HTS is also openly jihadist and Islamist. Jihadists and Islamists are not friendly towards Israel. That's just plain simple. I think we have to just put down the facts, and Israel's looking out for its interests. And I think when Assad did fall and Israel attacked the military bases across the country, that was very smart of them. That also is a strategic move. Brings great leverage towards the Kurds indirectly as well, because those weapons would not be used not only against Israel but against the Kurds. They can't start up these missile defense systems. They can't use the jets, get trained by Turkey and use the jets against the Kurds, for example, or against Israel. So I think the moves that Israel is making is for its own national security interests. And down the road, I think I'm sure there will be negotiations, but we'll see. But the tone and the pace that Israel has taken towards Damascus is the pace that the United States should be taking. It's being realistic, being honest, and assessing the developments on the ground for what they are, not what we hope them to be. The Israeli foreign minister described, the Damascus government, the new government, as a gang, right? Because these are Islamists. They're a bunch of random groups that just came in and rolled into Damascus. So we should just be honest and patient and not prematurely do anything that we don't have to.
So, do you think that the model for the new government in Damascus is Afghanistan?
I think it's too early for that, but I think if they continue, but right, because there's a lot of pressure that the Taliban didn't have in Afghanistan that Damascus does. Damascus wants relations with the West because HTS wants to be in power. And in order to do that, you have to give minorities rights. In order to do that, you have to say all the beautiful and nice things. You want your infrastructure rebuilt. You have to get that funding from the West. You have to get that funding from the EU and from the Gulf states. That Taliban didn't care about. They just wanted the United States out. They wanted, the country to themselves, and they'll take care of the rest. So the Taliban isn't hiding what it wants to do. It's showing you what it wants to do with not having, there's no rights for women and children and whatnot. And even girls in schools. HTS is telling you what you want to hear, but will eventually do something else on the ground. So I think we just have to acknowledge that and not just, again, not rush to recognize them. Engagement is fine, conversations are fine, but we have to use our leverage here that we have in the United States to demand that they do A, B, and C before we do anything as far as removing them from the terror list.
So, with Sykes-Picot, the Kurds got a very raw deal. I'm going to combine some questions. There are Kurds stretched throughout Iran, Iraq, Turkey, Syria. And the Palestinians have always had as an objective a Palestinian state. Will it ever be possible to carve an independent Kurdish state out of Syria, Iraq, or Iran?
Definitely, I think it's very possible. I wouldn't be doing this work. I think the Kurds, first of all, they have a right to a state. The Sykes-Picot, drew up and invented many states in the Middle East that didn't exist prior. I think what the Kurds in Syria are doing is the next step towards independence, and that's autonomy and self-governance. That's why it's so critical for the United States and the European Union and other countries to support that. It's a debt especially France and the UK, owe to the Kurds in Syria when they divided up the Middle East. I think a Palestinian state won't bring peace to the Middle East. I think I've always said that. Adding another Arab state to the region is unnecessary. There's already nearly 24 Arab states in the Middle East. Why can't there be one Kurdish state? That's just a plain and simple argument that you can't really argue or disagree with. Arabs already have many states. Kurds don't have one state yet. We won't accept a Kurdish state, but we want to add another Arab state. That does not make sense. Also, a Kurdish state will be pro-American, pro-Western, will not have any conflicts with any of its neighbors, including those who are just labeling Kurds as adversaries, like Iran and Turkey, and the Shiite militias and the Islamists in Syria. So I think the Kurds will be a peaceful neighbor to all its neighbors, including Israel as well. A Kurdish state is to the benefit of the Middle East, and I think it's long time. It's past time dues for the Kurds to have a state of their own. They can govern themselves. They can live their lives freely, and it would be a state not just for the Kurds. Keep that in mind. The Kurds in Iraq, Christians and other minorities live freely in the country. The Kurds in the northeast Syria, what they've established is minorities are welcome. Churches are flourishing in the northeast. They're protected. So I think that's a indication of what a Kurdish state would be like. And of course, the biggest adversaries are Iran and Turkey to this, and now supposedly HTS as well, threatening that Kurds must disarm. But we'll get to that when we get there.
Right. And we also owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to the Kurds because of their valiant fight against ISIS. And it's absolutely immoral for us to overlook in the United States. How many Kurds gave their lives?
And I was just going to say, over 15,000 Kurds have lost their lives with the fight against ISIS, and the fight against ISIS is still ongoing. They're not defeated. And we don't want that. If we want to keep the threat there rather than, taking it abroad in Europe, rather than having it come here in America, like we saw with the ideology, it's, being inspired with New Orleans. We have to invest in our allies, but we also have to hold accountable those that aid these terrorist organizations. That state is Turkey. Turkey has aided ISIS. Turkey has opened its borders to ISIS and its airports to ISIS fighters. They have Turkish passports and ID cards. They've provided. There's a video of Turkish military members with ISIS members. There's videos across the social media. It's not that hard to find evidence. U.S. officials have stated that. They know that. So I think we have to hold accountable. Those states are including our supposed NATO ally, Turkey, that there will be consequences if you continue to support jihadists and Islamist groups, that the United States will no longer overlook this.
This is an incredibly important fight. Very worried that another front might be opening up for Israel on the border with Syria, as Mohammad al-Jolani or Recep Tayyip Erdogan is determined to reestablish an Ottoman Empire. And you can certainly count on us at AMET to help the American Friends of Kurdistan Diliman. We should be hitting the hills soon as the members come back into town. And please know to support the American Friends of Kurdistan.org, which is a wonderful organization, and as well as ametonline.org. We both really depend on you for our support, and we will be with you all the way. Thank you so much, Diliman. It's just a pleasure to reunite with you once again.
Likewise. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for Emet for everything that you've done, just for the whole Middle East issue and the Kurdish issue as a whole. And I appreciate everything, and I look forward to working with you more on the Hill. And yeah, let's tackle this.
I'll tackle it.